Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. So, if you're, say, 15 right now, you're probably starting to think about your future, right? Maybe you're dreaming about college, getting your first apartment, or just kind of wondering how the real world and the economy actually works. Well, today we are diving into a really fascinating and honestly pretty controversial text. It presents this massive idea called the exclusion thesis. Now, as your host, I'm just here to unpack exactly what the author is claiming, totally neutrally. And their main claim? They argue that the financial struggles everyday people face, they aren't just bad luck. Actually, scratch that. They claim it's the result of a very specific, deliberate blueprint. Okay, let's dive right into this, because this is the absolute core question the source material poses. Is the economy broken, or is it working exactly as designed? We hear on the news all the time that inflation is just an accident or that the housing crisis is some unpredictable market failure. But the author of our source text? They make a wildly different, very bold claim. They argue the economy isn't broken at all. No, they claim it's a deliberately engineered machine, literally designed to extract wealth from everyday people and hand it straight over to the ultra-wealthy. So here is our agenda for today. We'll start with the exclusion thesis. Then we'll hit component 1, housing, component 2, education, and component 3, healthcare. Finally, we'll wrap up with what they call the double bind trap. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The exclusion thesis. Defining the machine. So, the core argument here is that the economy functions as a giant extraction machine. The blueprint says this machine is run by wealthy elites and oligarchs, and their number one goal is exclusion. Basically, they want to deliberately structure the economy so that the working and middle classes can never, ever own assets or build wealth. To explain how they pull this off, the author points to our first key concept, financialization. For those of you just jumping into economics, financialization is basically when big investors turn everyday basic human needs, like having a roof over your head or going to the doctor, into Wall Street investment products just to maximize profit. And according to the text, the absolute prime example of this was the 2008 wealth transfer. The author claims the huge 2008 financial crash wasn't just some big oopsie. They argue it was a trap that literally drove 50% of the middle class down into the lower class, permanently stripping their wealth and letting elites scoop up assets at absolute bargain prices. Section 2. Component 1. Housing. Weaponizing real estate. The source text uses housing as its first massive case study. They claim this system has taken the basic human right of shelter and weaponized it into a financial trap. The author lists off a whole bunch of predatory tactics that giant corporate landlords use to enforce this exclusion. First up, corporate rent hikes. They claim some of these firms have literally doubled rents in certain areas. Then there's eviction warfare, which is this aggressive, systematic removal of tenants. They also point to algorithmic price fixing. The claim here is that landlords are using special software to secretly collude and hike average rents by as much as 45%, and it gets crazier. The text claims landlords actually maintain intentional vacancies. Like, they'll buy up to 20% of homes in an area just to keep them empty, which artificially pumps up the market prices. Add all that to exclusionary zoning laws that ban affordable multifamily housing, and then the really shocking claim that some of these corporate landlords are raking in prison labor profits through ties to private for-profit prison companies. And the human cost of this eviction warfare is just absolutely staggering. According to the source, corporate landlords are operating a massive eviction machine, kicking out more than 1.2 million families in the year 2025 alone. To put that into perspective, that is a massive wave of displacement. The author argues this is a totally deliberate tactic to destabilize families, ensuring they can never stay in one place long enough to actually build a solid financial foundation. The text sums up this whole grim reality with one stark observation. Housing isn't a right, it's a commodity. The author insists that by using tools like exclusionary zoning and algorithmic price gouging, the wealthy elite are intentionally squeezing the working class dry. Because think about it, every extra dollar spent on an artificially inflated rent payment is a dollar that a family absolutely cannot save to buy their own home. Section 3. Component 2. Education. The trap of student debt. Now, if you are a teenager right now, this part is directly aimed at your near future. The text points to a mind-blowing number, $1.84 trillion. That is the total amount of student loan debt hanging over the heads of nearly 50 million students in the US right now. The author frames this really aggressively, calling it a mass incarceration of an entire generation. They argue this isn't just a normal credit market. No, it's a student debt prison specifically designed to force young people into lifelong financial servitude. So how does this prison actually work? Well, the author points straight at capitalized interest traps. For our younger viewers, capitalized interest is basically predatory math. Let's say you borrow $30,000 for college, right? Because of the way this interest compounds, where unpaid interest gets slapped onto your original loan and then you start getting charged interest on that new, bigger amount, you could be making payments for a whole decade and suddenly find out you owe $60,000. The thesis suggests this is 100% intentional. It's designed to make the debt hole deepen every single time you try to climb out. Just look at the reality of this debt trap. You have a borrower who has paid over $165,000, yet their remaining balance is still massive. The source text argues that this entire system is completely fueled by middleman profits. Private loan servicers, the author claims, take a massive 25% profit margin just for managing these exploding loans. So they are literally profiting off the borrower's inability to ever escape the debt. The text compares the past to the present to really hammer home that this is a deliberate trap. You see, before 2005, if your life completely fell apart, you could discharge student loans through bankruptcy, exactly like you could with credit card debt. But the author argues that elites aggressively lobbied for bankruptcy blocks, which passed in 2005, permanently locking the exit door. By making student loans immune to bankruptcy, the system ensures that this debt follows you forever, allowing them to garnish your wages and seize your tax refunds literally until the day you die. Section 4. Component 3. Healthcare. The final extraction. Okay, this is the final and honestly most extreme phase of the blueprint. The text claims that once they've extracted your wealth through housing and education, the machine comes for your health. The author outlines this brutal system of healthcare extraction. They point to ruthless tactics used by private equity firms that just swoop in and buy up hospitals. These tactics include things like aggressive claim denials, where insurance companies just flat out refuse to pay for totally necessary treatments, and massive pharma lobbying, which prevents the government from negotiating lower drug prices. The text argues that these firms strip mine the medical system, essentially forcing patients into bankruptcy just to stay alive. And all of this leads to the author's grim final claim. For the non-wealthy, being trapped in this highly financialized healthcare system ultimately leads to a terrifying conclusion. When everyday people cannot afford care simply because investors have squeezed every last drop of resources out of the hospitals, well, the result, the author argues, is exclusion and death. So the crucial point is summed up in this incredibly chilling quote from the source. In healthcare, exclusion is death. The author concludes that this wealth extraction machine, it doesn't have an off switch. It just continues to operate, demanding profits and denying care, even when it demonstrably prematurely kills the patient. It's a really stark claim about a system that allegedly prioritizes profit above human life itself. Section 5. The double-bind trap, a system with no exit. Now, the author brings all these gears, housing, education, healthcare, together to reveal the ultimate dilemma. If you are 15 today, you are facing a massive choice. Path 1 is going to college, which the author calls the education debt trap. Sure, you get a degree and maybe a higher salary, but predatory debt absolutely consumes all your extra money. Then there's Path 2, skipping college to avoid the debt, which the author calls the no education wage trap. You might have no debt, but your wages are mathematically too low to ever afford a home or save for retirement. The author's thesis is that both of these paths are perfectly engineered by the elite to prevent you from ever accumulating wealth. It's a real catch-22. We've unpacked a lot of really intense claims today from this source material detailing this massive, supposedly engineered system of financial exclusion. So I want to leave you with this question to really think about. If this author's exclusion thesis is right, is there a way to break the extraction machine? Or are young people permanently excluded from asset ownership? Look, whether you completely agree with the author's controversial claims or not, it absolutely forces us to look much closer at how our financial systems actually operate. Keep questioning, keep learning, and think critically about how you are going to navigate your own financial future.